Welcome to xMatters Demo Days. Thank you for joining us today. Share any comments or inquiries in the chat throughout today's presentation, and we can discuss them after the demo. I'm your host today. I'm Mandeep Jassal. I've been with xMatters for over 5 years. I'm on the customer success management team, and I'm based out of Vancouver, BC. Joining me today for the demo is Tim Wilde. Tim has been with xMatters for over 3 years. He's the lead solution architect and based out of Dallas, Texas. So today's demo is focused on the xMatters event flood control capability. If you've been through a flood of events and notifications, you already know how important event flood control is, especially for your sanity. When you have this in place with xMatters, it reduces the number of events that are generated when you experience a flood or an event storm for one or more of your systems. Without event flood control, other events that need to be processed could be hung up. Furthermore, all the notifications could be distracting and bombarding the same people trying to correct or fix the issue. It simply makes sense for the xMatters feature to inspect your incoming event requests and intelligently suppress events about the same issue that occur too closely to one another. When you take advantage of the event flood control feature, you're going to see 3 big improvements: reduction of noise, less disruption, and faster root cause analysis and mean time to resolution. So keep that in mind during the demo. All right, Tim, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Okay, so thanks for that intro, Mandeep. One way to see the effectiveness of an IT management system is to measure the impact of an event storm both with and without flood control in place to see how the event would have played out differently. The story we're about to share will do just that. It's a case study of an actual flood event that occurred with a real customer. Now, rest assured, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but the event data that we're going to be sharing is all real. We'll start by walking through how that event unfolded without flood control, and then we'll retrace that same event and see how that would have played out with event control in place to highlight the dramatically different outcome. Before we begin, though, there's a couple important things I want to note. First, the systems that we're talking about were working as intended. In this story, the monitoring tool is supposed to notice when things go wrong and send information to xMatters. In turn, xMatters is supposed to notify the intended recipients about the issues. So the systems were not misconfigured. They were doing what they were supposed to do. The problem was that the underlying issues snowballed, causing a cascading failure of multiple systems. And this is a great example of how an event storm can happen to you, even with your monitoring tools properly configured. So here's how it all started. One Tuesday morning, a core microservice in a service mesh somewhere had a little hiccup. The hiccup was picked up by a monitoring tool, which created an incident and injected it into xMatters. While xMatters was processing the event and sending notifications, the original hiccup resulted in something of a chain reaction back in the service infrastructure, because that microservice that failed was on a critical path for a host of other services. So all of those other services started failing, and the monitoring tools started firing events into xMatters at an overwhelming pace, sometimes up to 100 events per minute. And there were a number of teams alerted about this, but just to keep the context for our story today, let's focus on how the flood affected just one of those teams, the team that maintained the core service at the root of the problem. In the 60 seconds following the first event, the monitoring tool detected another 13 individual incidents, all related to that original hiccup. Each of those errors resulted in the monitoring tool creating another event for the same team in xMatters. This meant that the people who had been notified about the problem and were trying to investigate it got another 13 notifications about the same issue within that first minute. Everything went quiet for a few minutes, but then the flood really got underway. About 13 minutes after that first event, the monitoring tool triggered 45 more events to the same group. 1 minute later, another 63 events. The following minute, another 45 events. That's more than 150 events in just 3 minutes. And then over the next 25 minutes, the monitoring tool sent another 579 separate incidents into xMatters before going quiet again. Now, can you imagine trying to put together an incident response team, start an investigation, and resolve an issue when your phone is pinging you literally every 2.5 seconds? After a lull of about 8 minutes, the flood surged again. Over the next 34 minutes, xMatters received another 746 event injections, at which point the team managed to bypass that failed service. So all told, the monitoring tool sent 1,492 events targeting the same group into xMatters over the course of 60 minutes. And that was just for that one team responsible for the core service. Across all teams who responded to the incident, there were more than 4,400 events. And obviously that's a ton of noise to deal with when you're already trying to find and fix a problem. So now let's walk through that same scenario with xMatters event flood control as part of the story to see how it would have eased the pain considerably. So first, the default settings for event flood control will suppress correlated events if more than 4 events are injected within 60 seconds from the same integration and targeting the same recipients. xMatters will also send an update reminder if the flood continues for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever you have your setting at, or if it reaches 1,000 events, whichever of those comes first. So just for ease of tracking the timeline, let's say that the first hiccup occurs at 7 a.m. exactly. The monitoring tool detects a problem, creates an incident, and sends it along. xMatters processes the event, sends out the very first notification, and everything is smooth sailing so far. 1 minute later, at 7:01, the monitoring tool detects some more issues and sends 13 events to xMatters in quick succession. Event flood control kicks in, however, once that 5th event shows up. So xMatters only processes the first 4 events and suppresses the other 9, stacking them under the 4th event, which then becomes like the parent event for that flood. xMatters then sends a notification to the intended recipients, letting them know that a flood is happening, and it continues to monitor the rate of incoming events. At this point, the service team has dealt with a total of 6 notifications, right? And one of those was letting them know that an event flood had been detected instead of the original 14 events that would have happened. The first lull now occurs, and the flood stalls with no further events injected. And at 7:13, the monitoring tool injects 45 events into xMatters. Once again, event flood control kicks in when the 5th event arrives, and only 4 events are queued for processing. xMatters sends another event flood detected alert and starts stacking up incoming events underneath the new parent as the flood really starts to get going. By 7:28, xMatters has suppressed 347 events. Even more requests are incoming, however, so xMatters sends another reminder to the recipient target by the parent event to let them know that the flood is ongoing, and it continues to suppress more events. By the time the second lull hits around 7:39, the parent event lists 724 events on the suppression tab of its tracking report. Of course, the flood starts all over again 8 minutes later, so xMatters processes another 4 events, detects a flood on the 5th event, and promptly starts suppressing. The new parent event starts getting its own stack of suppressed events, and the recipients get an alert letting them know that that flood isn't quite finished yet. The flood finally starts petering out around 26 minutes later, after another flood reminder and an additional 718 suppressed events. The last few minutes, events are just trickling in at a rate of like 2 or 3 per minute, except for a brief blip of 9 events that happens just before the end. But just to be consistent, flood control still kicks in and suppresses 5 of those last 9 as well. So all told, in the story, xMatters creates just 34 events, including the system events that let the team members know that the flood was happening, as well as the flood continues reminder notifications. So a total of 1,464 events were suppressed. When you further factor in the other events targeting the different teams, right, of those original 4,400 events, you can really get a sense of just how many unnecessary events could be blocked across the entire organization. That's a lot of noise, interruptions, and distractions that the teams didn't have to deal with when they were trying to fix the original problem. And it's one hell of an interesting story. So now, to see how easy it is to configure event flood control, let's take a look live at xMatters. So I am logged in here into my xMatters console. And to view the event flood control rules, you navigate down to workflows and then event flood control. And I can see here the list of default rules that are created for each inbound trigger. These are the rules that are automatically created. And I can modify these rules, right? Or I can click on and create my own rule by clicking on the Create Rule button at the top right. Let's take a look at the Hat Corp flood rule here. This shows us the current current filter criteria for suppressing similar events, right? We see that the properties that we're matching on In this case, it's if the event is coming from the same source integration and targeting the same set of recipients. So if those are the same, then we consider that to be a similar event that we would then start tracking and suppressing if there are more than 4. We see the trigger conditions, which is more than 4 events in 60 seconds, right? So the 5th event that comes in would then be suppressed and would start the suppression. And we can also see the notification interval for the reminder events. So letting us know that a flood is still in progress, right? And which would be either 900 seconds or 1,000 events, whatever comes first. In addition to sending a reminder notification, xMatters can also trigger an HTTP webhook either to some external application or even back into xMatters to trigger an automation workflow. So now that we've seen how this rule is configured, let's see the flood control in action. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go initiate 8 events for this HAT Corp integration targeting the same set of recipients. And this will meet the flood suppression criteria for the rule. So xMatters will begin suppressing those events after the 4th event, and then suppression will continue until there's a 60-second period where that criteria is not met, and then that will end the current flood. So those events have now been queued, and we'll start receiving notifications in just a minute. We can browse to the reports, recent events, to then see the events as they come in and watch how the suppressed events are tracked. Right? So here we can see that they're coming in. I'm getting notifications on my mobile device. And we can see there's 4 events. And then under the 4th event, we can see this little stacking icon, which indicates that there are some events that are being suppressed. So if we look at that event, we can see there's a suppression tab. And so all of those additional 4 events that got suppressed are being stacked here under that suppression tab. Also note that the suppression event data is not lost, right? We continue to track all the information for reporting and for metrics, but we stop triggering notifications for those events so the technical teams can focus on solving the issue. But all of the data about those events are still captured, right? So we're not losing any of that information. It's all still here, just being stacked under the parent event. And if we look at my mobile device, we can see the notifications about the first 4, and then we also have the notification, the system event, letting us know that an event flood has been detected, right? And so this is just telling us that we're detecting a flood, FYI, and we're going to be, suppressing additional events and tracking it and stacking it under the parent event. So now let's go modify the event flood control to see how that changes the behavior. Let's go back to flood control. Let's go to the HAT Corp event. And so now let's add a new property to the selected properties. Let's use the resource ID property. There we go. So we just drag that in. It's just that easy to select from the list of available properties and just drag that into the properties that we're going to be selecting. So now the event has to come from the same source. It has to target the same recipients, and it has to have the same resource ID to be considered a similar event. Okay. So now I'll just scroll to the bottom here and save my changes. And then now we can look at how that modifies the suppression behavior. So I'm going to initiate 8 more events for the same HAT Corp integration, but only 6 of them will include the same resource ID. For the last 2, I'm going to change the resource ID to be something different. So if I have done this correctly, then the xMatters flood control should kick in after the 4th event, suppressing the 5th and 6th events. But since the 7th and 8th events will have a different resource ID, xMatters should not suppress those, allowing those events to come through. So let's go back and look at the reports. And so there we go. So we have an additional set of events. We can see that the last one from the original flood was at 10:13. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 events. And then you can see that after the 4th event, the 5th and 6th events were suppressed. But then the events that came through with a different resource ID did not get suppressed. Those were allowed to continue to come through. So if we look at the message here, we can see that here we go. The original ones were for PS load balance 01, but then I modified the resource ID to be 02. So you can see that it still allowed this one to come through instead of suppressing it. Should be same thing with this one. Yeah, see, so those last two where I changed the resource ID, xMatters did not suppress those. It let those notifications still come through, but it suppressed the 5th and 6th events that were part of the flood. So this second scenario is an example of how even though xMatters may be suppressing an event flood for a certain condition on a particular server, if a different type of failure happens to occur on that same server at the same time, you would want that event to come through because it may contain additional information about what else is going on with the server. And that might be really important in determining the root cause, right? So this simple example demonstrates how xMatters filters all the noise and alerts that don't provide any new information, and that eliminates all the unnecessary distractions for your team while still allowing important signals to get through so that you can focus on the new information and then take action as quickly as possible. So this has been just a quick highlight of event flood control with xMatters. If you have any questions, please let us know in the chat. And with that, I'll toss it back over to you, Mandy.
Thank you again, Tim. As you just saw, it simply makes sense for the xMatters flood control feature to inspect your incoming event requests and suppress similar events in a short amount of time. This means that events from other sources can flow through xMatters without waiting for a backlog of redundant events to clear. To summarize, when you take advantage of the event flood control feature, you're going to see the 3 big improvements: reduction of noise, less disruption, and faster true root cause resolution. xMatters has helped thousands of teams gain efficiencies across development and infrastructure departments around the world. We've reduced wasted time from unplanned and annoying disruptions while giving innovators precious time back to create and thrive in today's digital service world. In this demo, we protected the identity of the large and global company when sharing this case study, but I do want to encourage you to read about our other customer success stories, which are always available on G2. This is just a sample of some of the amazing comments and customer testimonials we've received on G2, and we are eager to help you achieve incredible success. All right, I got a question here. Can you have multiple rules for the same source? Is there a limit to how many rules you can create? Tim?
Yes, you can have multiple rules for the same source. So that way you can detect certain different types of floods, right? So kind of as I was showing in my demo, you can have, well, in my demo, we modified the rule for the same event, but you could have different rules for the same event, right? So if you're monitoring for different types of conditions, maybe something coming in from the same source, there might be a particular condition that you want to check for, but then there could be other conditions relating to that you also want to check for. So you can have multiple rules for the same source, yes. And is there is there a limit to how many rules, right?
That's right, yeah.
No, there's no limit to how many rules you can create. You can create as many as you want for as many different integrations as you have.
Excellent. We do have another question here. What type of properties can you filter on? Are the properties always the same for every rule?
So no, they're not the same for every rule. The properties are going to depend on what properties are being sent over by the trigger, right? So depending on what integration you have, whatever properties are being sent by that and included in the payload of that property, those are all of the filter or the properties that you have to be able to filter on. So those get mapped to properties in xMatters when they come in, and so you can select from any of those properties that the payload is being mapped to, and those are going to be different for every source, right, or for every integration. So it just depends on how those integrations are configured. But basically anything that is in the payload that is being sent over to xMatters can be a property that you can filter on.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. All right. So if you want to try out the event flood control feature or try out xMatters, you can sign up for a trial of xMatters, or you can get it free forever. Just go to xmatters.com/signup and get your own instance of xMatters. Also, remember, we have many more webinars scheduled. So to see a complete list of upcoming webinars, go to xmatters.com/demo-days. And don't forget to follow us on our various channels, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, where we share even more content, and we'd love to connect with you directly. Well, thank you, Tim, for guiding us through the overview of xMatters Event Flood Control. And to our guests, thank you for joining us today. This concludes the Event Flood Control Demo Days event. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.